Hello friends, welcome to the Point. In today's session, let's discuss about economic reforms since 1991. We will be discussing about the economic reforms in liberalization, privatization and globalization. So in the previous session, we have studied that since independence, India followed mixed economy. That is by combining the advantages of capitalist economic system with socialist economic system. In 1991, India met with an economic crisis that relates to its external debt. The government was unable to make repayments on its borrowings from abroad, foreign exchange reserves, which we generally maintain to import, petrol and other important items. It dropped to that level where our exchanges from foreign reserves were not sufficient even for a fortnight. So the crisis, it was further compounded by rising prices of essential goods, and all this, it led the government to introduce a new set of policy measures, and that changed the direction of our developmental strategies. So in this session, we will look at the background of the crisis measures that the government has adopted and their impact on various sectors of economy. The origin of financial crisis, it can be traced from the inefficient management of Indian economy in the year 1980s. So we know that for implementing various policies, its general administration, the government generates funds from various sources such as taxation, running of the public sector enterprises and so on. So when expenditure is more than income, the government, it borrows to finance and the deficit from banks and also from the people within the country and from the international financial institutions. So when we import goods like petroleum, we pay in dollars, which we earn from our exports. Development policies required that even though the revenues were very low, the government had to overshoot its revenue to meet challenges like unemployment, poverty, and population explosion. The continued spending on development programs of the government, it did not generate additional revenue. The government was not able to generate enough money from internal tax. So when the government was spending a large share of its income on the areas which do not provide immediate returns such as social sector and defense, there was a need to utilize the rest of its revenue. The income from public sector undertakings was also not very high to meet the growing expenditure. In the late 1980s, government expenditure, it began to exceed its revenue. Prices of many essential goods, it rose sharply. Imports grew at a very high rate without matching growth of exports. So foreign exchange, it was also not sufficient to pay the interest that needs to be paid to international lenders. And also no country or international funder was willing to lend India. And at that time, India approached the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which is called as IBRD Bank. And this bank, it is popularly known as World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. And India received $7 billion as a loan to manage the crisis. India agreed to the conditionalities of the World Bank and IMF and announced the new economic policy. And the new economic policy, it consisted of wide-ranging economic reforms. And the thrust of the policies was towards creating a more competitive environment in the economy and removing the barriers to entry and growth of firms. And this set of policies, it can be broadly classified into two groups: the stabilization measures and the structural reform measures. Stabilization measures, they are short-term measures which are intended to correct some of the weakness that have developed in balance of payments and to bring inflation under control. So in simple words, we can say that there was a need to maintain sufficient foreign exchange reserves and keep the rising prices under control. So the structural reform measures, they are a long-term measures which are aimed at improving the efficiency of the economy and increasing its international competitiveness by removing the rigidities in various segments of Indian economy. And at that time, the government initiated a variety of policies which falls under three heads. They are liberalization, privatization and globalization. Liberalization. Rules and laws which were aimed at regulating the economic activities, it became a major hindrances in growth and development. And liberalization, it was introduced to put an end to all these restrictions and open various sectors of economy. Even though a few liberalization measures were introduced in 1980s in areas of industrial licensing, export-import policy, technology, upgradation, fiscal policy and foreign investment reforms initiated in 1991 were more comprehensive. Now let us study some important areas like the industrial sector, financial sector, tax reforms, foreign exchange markets and trade and investment sectors, which received a very great attention in and after 1991. Deregulation of industrial sector. So in India, regulatory mechanisms were enforced in various ways. Industrial licensing, under which every entrepreneur had to get permission from government officials to start a firm, close a firm or decide the amount of goods that could be produced. Private sector was not allowed in many industries, and some goods it could be produced only in a small scale industries, and it controls on price fixation and distribution of selected industrial products. The reform policies introduced in and after 1991, it removed many of these restrictions. Industrial licensing was abolished for almost all but product categories like alcohol, cigarettes and hazardous chemical industries, explosives, electronics, drugs and pharmaceuticals. The only industry which are now reserved for the public sector are a part of defense equipment, atomic energy generation and railway transport. Financial sector reforms. Financial sector, it includes financial institutions like commercial banks, investment banks, stock exchange operations and foreign exchange market. The financial sector in India, it is regulated by Reserve Bank of India. In short, it is called as RBI. So the RBI, it decides the amount of money that the banks can keep with themselves. It fixes interest rates, nature of lending to various sectors and so on. And one of the major aims of financial sector reforms is to reduce the role of RBI from regulator to facilitator of financial sector. This means that financial sector may be allowed to take decisions on many matters without consulting RBI. The reform policies led to the establishment of private sector banks, Indian as well as foreign. Foreign investment limit in banks, it was raised around 50%, and those banks which fulfill certain conditions, they have been given freedom to set up new branches without the approval of RBI and rationalize their existing branch network. Tax reforms. Tax reforms, they are concerned with the reforms in the government's taxation and public expenditure policies, which are collectively known as its fiscal policy. And there are two types of taxes, direct and indirect. So direct taxes, it consists of taxes on income of individuals as well as profits of business entrepreneurs. And since 1991, there has been a continuous reduction in the taxes on individual income tax, were an important reason for tax evasion. And it is now widely accepted that moderate rates of income tax, it encourages savings and voluntary disclosure of income. The rate of corporation tax, which was very high earlier, it has been gradually reduced. And efforts have been made to reform indirect taxes, taxes levied on commodities, in order to facilitate the establishment of common national market for goods and commodities. Foreign exchange reforms. The first important reform in the external sector, it was made in the foreign exchange market. In the year 1991, as an immediate measure to resolve the balance of payment crisis, the rupee was devalued against foreign currencies, and this led to an increase in the inflow of foreign exchange. It also set the tone to free the determination of rupee value in foreign exchange market from government control. Trade and investment policy reforms. Liberalization of trade and investment regime, it was initiated to increase international competitiveness of industrial production and also foreign investment and technology into the economy. The aim was also to promote the efficiency of local industries and adoption of modern technologies. Privatization. Privatization, it implies shedding of the ownership or management of a government-owned enterprise. Government companies, they are converted into private companies in two ways: by withdrawal of government from ownership and management of public sector companies, and by outright sale of public sector companies. Privatization of public sector enterprise by selling off part of the equity of PSEs to public is known as disinvestment. The purpose of the sale, according to the government, it was mainly to improve financial discipline and facilitate modernization. And the government, it also envisaged that private capital and managerial capabilities, it could be effectively utilized to improve the performance of PSUs. The government envisaged that privatization, it could provide strong impetus to the inflow of foreign direct investment, and the government, it has also made attempts to improve the efficiency of PSUs by giving them autonomy in taking managerial decisions. Globalization. Although globalization is generally understood to mean integration of the economy of the country with the world economy, it is a complex phenomenon. So globalization, it is an outcome of set of various policies that are aimed at transforming the world towards greater interdependence and integration. So globalization, it involves creation of networks and activities transcending economic, social and geographical boundaries. So globalization is turning the world into one whole or creating a borderless world. Outsourcing. So this is one of the important outcomes of globalization process. In outsourcing, a company, it hires regular service from external sources, mostly from other countries, which was previously provided internally or from within the country. World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization, it was founded in the year 1995 and as a successor organization to the General Agreement on Trade and Tariff. In short, it is called as GATT. GATT, it was established in 1948 with 23 countries as a global trade organization to administer all multilateral trade agreements by providing equal opportunities to all countries in the international market for trading purpose. So WTO, it is expected to establish a rule-based trading regime in which nations cannot place arbitrary restrictions on trade. The WTO agreements cover trade in goods as well as services to facilitate international trade through removal of tariffs as well as non-tariff barriers and providing greater market access to all member countries. So finally, we can say that the process of globalization through liberalization and privatization policies, it has produced positive as well as negative results both for India and other countries. And some scholars, they argue that globalization should be seen as an opportunity in terms of greater access to global markets, high technology and increased possibility of large industries of developing countries to become important players in the international arena. So see you all in the next session with some other interesting topic. Thank you.